Imagine you're running a business and you notice something shifts. Sales dip, your website traffic drops, or a competitor starts suddenly gaining attention. There are two different research questions hiding inside that situation. One is, what is happening? The other is, what's causing it? Chapters 8 and 9 really work together because Chapter 9 helps us describe what's going on using primary data you collect, and Chapter 8 helps you test whether something actually caused that outcome. So let's start with descriptive primary data. Descriptive research is used to describe characteristics of groups, determine the proportion of people who behave in a certain way, and make specific predictions. In real life, this is the research you use to get your bearings and quantify the situation. If you're a coffee shop and you think you're losing customers, descriptive research helps you figure out things like which customer group is visiting less, is it weekday mornings or is it weekends, is it fewer visits, smaller ticket sizes, or fewer mobile orders, and how big is the change? One key point from this chapter is that descriptive research has to be specific before you ever start collecting the data. It's more rigid than exploratory research because you need to clearly define who you're studying and what you're measuring, and when and where you're measuring it and how you're going to capture it. There is a lot of weak projects and they fail because people start collecting data before they have a really good tight question. So there are two common descriptive designs to know. The first is cross-sectional research, which is basically a snapshot. You collect data one time from a sample and you summarize it, often through a sample survey where the goal is things like percentages, averages, and comparisons across those groups. So for example, you might survey students this week to learn what percentage have used a certain app, or how satisfied they are with the service, or what features they value most. The second is a longitudinal research, which means you're measuring the same fixed sample repeatedly over time, often using a consumer panel. A cross-sectional study is going to tell you what's true right now. A longitudinal study is going to tell you what is changing, and it's especially helpful when behavior shifts over weeks or months. A simple example is tracking the same customers over, say, a year to see who, when they cancel, when they upgrade, or see if their purchasing patterns, change after a promotion. Another helpful idea in Chapter 9 is the types of primary data that marketers collect. A lot of marketing data falls into categories like behavior, demographics, psychographics or lifestyle, attitudes, knowledge or awareness, intentions, and motivation. Marketers often prioritize behavior. That is what people did or are doing, because behavior is the closest to the outcomes businesses care about. If you see fewer purchases, that's important, but it doesn't tell you whether the reason is price, shipping, a confusing checkout page, a competitor's discount, or just seasonality. Descriptive research maps the situation clearly, but it doesn't prove the cause. So that's where Chapter 8 comes in, causal research. Causal research emphasizes determining the cause and effect relationship, and it's typically done through experiments. When you hear someone say, this marketing changed cause made sales go up, Chapter 8 basically asks, do you have enough evidence to say that? To make a cause and effect claim, the chapter points to three requirements. First, the cause and the effect have to vary together in a way where your hypothesis predicts, meaning when X changes, Y changes in a consistent pattern. Second, the timing has to make sense. The cause has to happen before the effect. Third, you have to rule out other explanations as much as possible, knowing you can never eliminate every possibility perfectly. Now, what does this look like in practice? An experiment is when you manipulate one or more independent variables, your X, and observe how a dependent variable, your Y, changes while controlling the other factors. So if you want to test whether a price change increases sales, the price is the independent variable and the sales are the dependent variable. Or if you want to test whether a new email subject line increases opens, the subject line is X and the open rate is Y. This leads to a very modern and very practical version of experiments, which is A/B testing. An A/B test is a field experiment where two versions of something are compared, ideally with random assignment, and you evaluate outcomes like the click-through rate, the sign-ups, the purchases. A simple example is version A of a website button versus version B, and you compare which one drives more conversions. The chapter also notes that sometimes the differences you're looking for are small, so the setup matters and you need enough observations to be confident in the result. One last important trade-off from this chapter is lab versus field experiments. Lab experiments give you more control, which usually improves internal validity, your confidence that X caused Y rather than something else. Field experiments happen in real-world settings, which usually improves the external validity, how well your results generalize in the real marketplace. But if you test an idea in a controlled classroom-like setting, you can control distractions. If you test in a real store or a live website, you get realism, but you also inherit the messiness of real life. So here's the takeaway to hold on to. Descriptive primary data helps you clearly measure and describe what is happening. Who, what, when, and where, and how much, often with a snapshot or tracking over time. Causal research is what you use when you need to make a decision and you want evidence that a specific action is driving a specific outcome, usually through experiments or A/B tests. Descriptive tells you what's going on. Causal helps you prove what's causing it.